I am a Christian psychotherapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor. Just looking at our faith, God never promises us an easy life. I definitely believe that being able to bring God into a session and examining faith, we see results, we see healing, chains being broken, forgiveness, restoration, the marriages. I know that's God.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Two Things You Shouldn't Talk About. I'm joined this week by Pete Ruffini. Pete, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me, Josh. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, me too. I think it'll be awesome. So why don't you go ahead and just share a little bit about who you are, what kind of things you do as a career and what your ministry is, just let people know, what you're all about.
Sure. Yeah. So I am a Christian psychotherapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor and in private practice, and I'm also a clinical supervisor at the Center for Christian Counseling and Relationship Development in Princeton, New Jersey. And what I do is I use real psychology, real tried and true effective theory, but I integrate it with our faith. So everything that we do is through the lens of our faith in Jesus Christ. So I went to the same schools, got the same credentials that a secular therapist would have, only I'm able to pray with my clients in sessions, talk about biblical truths, and in a non-judgmental way discuss faith or doubt or these other things that people deal with while they're suffering, going through a season of suffering.
Yeah, and that's something I think it definitely appeals more to us Christians. We like to be able to talk to people who understand the world from a similar worldview that we do, so I think it's awesome that that's all integrated in your work. How did you kind of get interested in this this kind of career path? Were you always kind of interested in helping people or ministering to them, or was it kind of a longer journey over the course of your life? Yeah,
it was a really long journey. I didn't know I wanted to be a therapist until probably my early 30s. Going back, I was a troubled, what I would call a troubled youth, a troubled adolescent. A lot of anger, rebellion, hanging out with a rough crowd, and I fell into this crowd, and I got into drugs, alcohol, partying at a very young age. And I remember my parents tried everything to help me. Right, they brought me to people like me, and they all kind of said the same thing, like, you're at this rate you're going to be dead or in jail before you graduate high school. And they were half right. I actually was pulled out of school in handcuffs for selling drugs. When I was 17, I was 18. I was in the last class before graduating. So I spent a year in jail before getting my high school diploma. And when I got out, without a diploma and pretty much on my own, I did the only thing I could do really to support myself, and what I knew how to do was to sell drugs. So jail didn't straighten me out at all. It just taught me some things and really made me more angry at the world. And I got a crew of other people like me. We started selling drugs up and down the East Coast. And I don't, sometimes when you talk to people who get out of this life, they like to brag, and I want to be careful. I don't want this to turn into war stories per se, but I just want to give the scope of what was going on. We were selling to colleges up and down the East Coast, fraternities and partying, living in beach towns. And this went on for a few years. And even though we weren't violent people per se, we weren't hurting anyone overtly. We weren't gangsters. We were more partiers, right? But people were definitely impacted by the drugs that we sold, and I'm just not proud of that at all. And of course, and when I got out, there's always a reckoning when you're selling drugs. There's always, you never make it to it. There's no top to get to. There's always someone else, or there's the police, right? So there was an opportunity for us to, we had a lot of our money towards the end stolen by a rival crew, and we had the option, we had the option to go after them. But something within me, I know now that was God, saying, look, this is it. You don't need that money. You don't need to go do this. It was it would be like crossing a moral Rubicon, right? Like something you can never come back from. So I decided not to pursue that, and I'm glad. So that was something that I, looking back, I'm just so grateful that even when I didn't know Christ, Christ had me the whole time. But I got out of that lifestyle, and I started to, all right, I'm going to do things. I'm going to start going to school, get my diploma, go to community college, and work whatever, video stores, restaurants, whatever I could do without an education. But the addiction stayed with me. So, I'm doing the right things during the week, but in the weekend, I'm out there drinking, cocaine, doing drugs on the weekend, partying. And then I get into a 4-year school. And about this time, I'm kind of thinking, what do I want to do? At first, I was a history major. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool, interesting stuff. And then I kind of want to help people because I feel like I'm kind of on the right path, even though I wasn't. I mean, I was still using drugs. I was still partying. But it was something within me led me down this path despite that. Even though I hadn't actualized myself psychologically, I still wanted to help other people. And I joined a fraternity, and I was, was a big partier. And then I got into grad school, and I started to feel a sense of, a lot of guilt about what I was doing, this double life that I was living, and also a lot of guilt about my past as a drug dealer. So, the drinking, the drugs became a way to numb and escape and not have to deal with the guilt that I had when I was out there selling drugs and just the stuff that we did. So I was on my way to a party, and I was drinking. I was texting my drug dealer, and I smashed into a parked car. No one was hurt, and I just remember, that was it. I was done. Like someone could have been killed. What am I doing I'm in grad school. Like I have so many opportunities, and yet it just shows the hold that addictions really have on us. So I got clean. That was January 15th, 2011. That was the last time that I used. And 6 months later, I became a Christian. I started going to church at the recommendation of a friend. And I just experienced the power of the Holy Spirit. It was the night of Hurricane Irene. I remember praying in my room, and the trees outside were shaking, and the wind and the rain. And I was listening to worship music on YouTube and praising when the storm came on. And I just remember this sense of peace came over me, and I gave myself over to Jesus Christ completely. I'd kind of been on the fence up until then. Ever since then, it was, the first couple of years anyway, it was, it's not like night and day for some of us. We still have to work through our issues. And even though I wasn't using drugs, I still had some of the anger, the pride, the lust, all that stuff that us in the world, typically just the flesh, right? It's just how we live.
Right.
So I started to, tackle the pornography and the pride, and I was really ashamed about my past, and I started to talk openly about, what I had done, and that really helped with the shame. But until I started going to therapy, I just dealt with an incredible amount of anxiety, just about everything that I had been through, everything that I had done and seen, some traumatic events. And it really wasn't until later in my walk, and I connected with a Christian therapist, that even though I knew Christ forgave me, I wasn't able to forgive myself for quite a period of time. And I finally was able to do that. And I was in grad school finishing up my degree, and I thought, this is secular, right? This is a secular degree. Like, how can I serve the Lord? How can I glorify God through this too? And I kind of fell into, not quite right away, I was working for the state of New Jersey. I was doing some other work, but I eventually transitioned to private practice. And, I wanted to integrate my faith with my skills and kind of market myself to other Christians who are dealing with not necessarily the same things that I was, but, just issues in life, right? Marriage issues, addictions, stress, anxiety, depression. And so that is how I became a Christian psychotherapist.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. It's, it sounds like it was, like you said, a long process over many years of kind of coming to this point. And Did you grow up in a Christian household, or was there religion in your household from a young age, or was this like a totally new concept for you at that time?
Yeah, I grew up Catholic household, and and I have many Catholic friends that it was on me. I never pursued a relationship with Christ at that point, and there were plenty of great people who tried to help me through. My parents, very devout, have relationships with Jesus, and there was a couple mentors that tried to help me. And there was also some mentors. I don't want to call them mentors, but there were people that were took advantage of me too. There was a priest who I had my first experience with hard drugs with when I was younger. So that there's a lot of confusion about my faith. As I started to explore the idea of God later on, I started to go to a non-denominational church when I came back to Christ. I don't want to say came back. I wasn't really living that Christian life at all. It was just a thing. It was a cultural thing for me. It was you go to mass on Sundays and that's about it. And I went through the confirmation and all that, but I really didn't have a relationship with the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. And you said that moment that you hit that parked car. So that was a moment where it was like your eyes were kind of open to what you were doing with your life, and it was like a real moment that just shifted your perspective on everything.
Yeah, it was like there was already an internal change happening, but I hadn't quite gotten there yet. And then once I hit the car, I ran. I later turned myself in. There was no one there, it was like I just couldn't get over the fact that someone could have been in that car and I could have killed them. And there was no passenger in my car. It was just me driving. I had my seatbelt on. It was just like, that wasn't the worst I had done by any means. And it wasn't even, and there's a big deal, but it wasn't, they're selling the drugs. There's all kinds of stuff that you see while you're doing that. But it was just like I was just so tired and just done. And I just knew that something had to give. It was just an internal conflict with the kind of life that I wanted to live. And I just know that was the Holy Spirit working within me the whole time.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me, you mentioned about being in prison at a reasonably young age, right? And was there a rehabilitation process there where were you introduced to therapists in the prison system, or did they try to help people who were going through that process? Because that would seem like, a lot of people talk about how it's kind of a transformative process, but it's interesting to me that for you it didn't straighten you out, like you said. You kind of came in and then you came out again.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I got in trouble as a juvenile too, and I went through a juvenile program where I did have a lot more support, and I was young and I just wasn't ready for it. In jail, there are programs. There was a social worker that I saw, and she was great. I just I wasn't ready for that, and so later on in my career, when I worked for the state of New Jersey, I did sit on a prisoner reentry committee where we tried to link the gaps between rehabilitation, employment of people coming out of prison. And there is a need for that. There is definitely a need for services within the prison systems too. But this was back in 1997 when I was in jail. So it was also a different state. This is in Virginia. I don't want to compare Virginia to New Jersey per se, but definitely decades ago things were different. And we're seeing a push now so I earned my executive pardon from the governor of Virginia back in 2020. I applied for that, and they did a bunch. They did research. There's a process they go through. But this isn't something that was done 2 decades ago. You couldn't really get expungements and pardons and things like that.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think we're on the right track. But just to answer your question, back then it just was not. I wouldn't. No one could have said anything to me. It's just the same thing when I'm working with a client. If they're not ready for change, it doesn't really matter what I say. Well,
that's interesting, because that's kind of where I was going with that, because when you said, that it's, you weren't ready for that. I was wondering, is that something when people come into your office, I imagine a lot of the time it's maybe, this may be right or wrong, but it seems like an image that I have in my mind of like a parent dragging a kid or a wife dragging a husband or something like that into your office to try and change their lives and, save our marriage or save my kid, this kind of stuff. So do you find that people have to have that moment themselves where they realize that they're in need of some help or that they need to change something?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because we're in private practice, we don't have mandated clients. I did at my previous job, I have to be here because my PO says I need to be here, right? But
yeah.
But when we're private practice, it's people just come in and they call us, hey, I need help, or a pastor refers someone to us. And the only time that I really see people who don't want to be there are two situations: a teenager whose parents are dragging them in, for adolescent therapy, or and sometimes, not often, but sometimes in a marriage situation for marriage therapy. My wife's making me come in. I don't think there's an issue, or some resistance there.
It's a good guess on my part that I nailed both of those.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sure it's tough to try and get through to people. Do you find like it's a long process of trying to, have people really take a look at their lives? Like, are some people really resistant to that?
That's a good question. Because because it's private practice, I feel like the people really want change. Or at the very beginning, at least they want change in their circumstances, or they want to feel better. And not always, but sometimes it is, self-caused sometimes, right? But oftentimes it's not. I mean, it's just looking at our faith, God never promises us an easy life, right? So situations are going to happen. There's a season for everything. And people are just hurting and they just want a place to turn to. So they call us and they, someone suggested I talk to a therapist. So they're usually pretty open to my suggestions. Sometimes we need to, I don't want to say tough love, but sometimes we need to be willing to confront a client if we see a self-destructive behavior that they're not aware of. But I never really have anyone sitting across from me say, I don't believe that, or I don't agree with that. Most people are willing to do whatever it takes to get better, to feel better.
Yeah. But yeah, that's, at least to see a relief in the symptoms or whatever's going on in their life. And another, I guess, kind of, maybe this is a misconception, maybe it's not, but I always thought, going to see a therapist, that everyone would have that moment laying on the couch where they again, their eyes are open, they see everything in a new light. And, do you often see that, or is it a lot of the time, is it building this long, building a relationship with the client and helping them, explore things over many, many weeks? And, how often do you find that it's a really long-term process, like helping people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some people respond to therapy right away. The majority, I don't have, this is anecdotal just from my experience, but usually my clients are usually with me for anywhere from 6 months to a year or two. At our practice, so there's different theories that you can use when helping people. There's cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT therapy, which is really about symptom reduction. And it's great. It does work. It's been proven to work. The problem is that sometimes it's like slapping a Band-Aid on something that really needs surgery, right? So it's the idea is that, all right, you come in for anxiety, so we'll do some CBT therapy. I'll give you some homework, some exercises to do. But, if you're just constantly, trying to change your thoughts, which, your feelings follow, what's going to happen? Where's the anxiety coming from? So we want to go deeper. Right. We want to see, is this coming from something that happened to you in your childhood? Did you internalize a false belief about yourself or about the world around you? Was there abuse? Was there bullying? Were you betrayed? Is there infidelity in your past in a previous marriage? There's just a lot. So what we try to do in the first few sessions anyways, we take a very detailed history of our clients. We call this a conceptualization, and we conceptualize all facets of the client's life. We look at their upbringing, what was their family of origin like, what was school like, what are your symptoms like, what is work like, what are your beliefs? And we take all that into account when we look at the presenting symptoms, because we want to see where the symptoms are coming from. And yeah, it's usually a process for most people. It's usually a chipping away at, because if you have such an ingrained core belief about yourself that's negative, or about the world, or you have been dealing with depression or anxiety for years, it takes a little bit of time to undo that and unravel that.
Right.
And that's okay. And it's very normal. Sometimes people might say, well, I tried therapy before. It didn't really work. Well, if you went for 2 weeks, maybe try a different therapist. It's very important to have a therapist that you feel connected to, that you feel is really in your corner, because research shows that therapeutic alliance with your client is the most effective part of therapy, regardless of what you actually do with your client.
Right. And if you don't respect and trust someone, you're not going to take their advice on board. And I'm sure there's probably times where you recommend that someone goes and sees someone else, if you just feel like that it's not working with you. Do you have to do that often?
Not often, but I certainly do that. Yeah. That's, we are, ethically we're obligated to do that. And whether some therapists do or don't, that's another question. But yeah, there's been some clients where I'm like, hey, what you're going through, you really need a more emergent care. We really need to get you connected with someone, a team even, because maybe there needs to be some medication involved, or maybe you need a social worker involved to help with some other situations, homelessness and things like that. So, we refer out when it's appropriate all the time. Yeah.
So you mentioned CBT as kind of one approach, and that's, I take it that, like you said, it's trying to minimize the symptoms that they're facing through trying to kind of almost reprogram how they interpret things. Is that right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, the idea of CBT is, so one exercise that we do with clients is I may have them make a thought chart. And it seems almost too simple, right? It seems patronizing even to ask someone to write down their thoughts and make a little line here and there. But what they do is they write the situation down, and then they put their emotion down next to that. And we follow that emotion to the thought, right? So situation, you lose your job, right? Okay, that would make anyone feel bad, right?
Right.
but they're dealing with extreme, they're having panic attacks because of this. They're having extreme anxiety. So we follow the emotion to find an automatic thought. Automatic thoughts are usually coming from, if you look at the tip of an iceberg, below the water, on top is the automatic thought. Below is a core belief that usually these automatic thoughts stem from. We really want to chip away at those. So I'll have someone, explore what that thought is. So the thought might be, well, I'm a failure, right? You lose your job and you think I'm a failure. And the job itself, losing the job can cause distress, but also if you really believe you're a failure, anytime that something reinforces that, you're going to go through an incredible amount of suffering. So what we do is we change someone's thought to look at the situation through a different perspective. And the whole premise of CBT is if you change your thoughts, the feelings will follow too. So if you start to change your thoughts to look at something in a positive light, you can actually feel better. And we challenge that with different challenges. Asking yourself, is this situation permanent? Is this situation, is this true? Is this thought I'm having true? And is it something that I can live with? And most of the time people will say, well, it's not permanent. And they start to feel better knowing, well, hey, I lost my job, right? But I'm not always gonna have I'm not always gonna be jobless, right? Is it true that you're really a failure? Well, let's look at the facts. You've done X, Y, and Z in your life. You held this job for 9 years. It was a high-powered job. Yeah, you're not actually a failure. So we start to challenge those negative thoughts with these challenging thoughts, and then we look at your emotions afterward. And it's very technical. There's a lot of homework in this. It's interesting. Yeah,
and there's do you find that most of these comes from like an experience in their life, like you said, maybe a childhood experience or something that was built into their worldview?
Yeah, I think a good portion comes from what we internalize when we're younger, from situations, experiencing suffering when we're younger, not being able to kind of deal with that or not knowing what's going on. When you're younger, your parents are your sense of security. So if there's conflict between your parents, or if there's abuse, or even if your parents are displaying anxiety, and there could be great parents, no one's perfect, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses. But if your parents are displaying anxiety, you internalize that the world is a scary place because your sense of security is worried. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
And looking at your kind of day-to-day kind of work and the people that you normally deal with, it seems like these days, I mean, I feel like most people have had a struggle with anxiety and depression. That seems to be like the big ones that people, that I hear people whenever they talk about their mental health. It's often that they felt depressed or that they feel anxious about something. To you, are they the ones is that what you deal with most of your day? Do you find, or are there often, a wide range of issues that you can see in the course of one day?
Yeah. So you're right. Most of the people that come into us in private practice are pretty functional. So it is going to be more on the like the neurotic side of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. It's going to be anxiety, depression. There are some people with some OCD, which is a form of anxiety, some panic. But sometimes people come in for what we call adjustment disorder, which is really just exaggerated response to stress or a situation in life that is not favorable to the client. So, people come in to work through, I don't know what to do in my marriage. Pornography is a big one among men coming in.
Wow.
Especially in our faith. Guys are coming in all the time and want help with that. We don't see, so in private practice, we don't see too much on the more side of psychosis, thought disorders, personality disorders, because those people are usually going to be going to a place like a clinic or an agency, using Medicare, Medicaid, and things like that.
So do you think it's a societal thing that, we just have a lot of triggers to anxiety and depression, or are we handling it worse than we used to? Because sometimes I wonder, as in today's society, do we think too much about things to the point where we overanalyze to the point of anxiety and depression? Because it's either that, or people years ago just didn't deal with these things as often and kept it quiet, or like they just just pretended like it didn't happen. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. Is this something that's getting worse, or are we handling it differently to what we used to?
That's a great question. A lot of people will say it's getting worse. But, we want to ask ourselves, is it getting worse, or are we just becoming more aware and open to talking about it? We live in a different world, and I don't want to sound like the cliche old man, technology, this and that, but, we are definitely, in a time where there's more exposure to information, and media, has always peddled fear, right? There's just been a lot of changes in our world, especially in the last few years. Depending on, no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, there's fear, right? And I think that generations past, there was definitely a hesitation to seek therapy. It was seen as something only for people who were weak or who really had serious issues. And I think now that there's more of a acceptance in our culture to talk about things openly. I think that people are more willing to admit weakness as they see it, even though I don't think it's weakness. We all suffer, so why not talk about it? If you're hiding it, then, you're still suffering. So, but among our faith, among Christians, I think there's more of a hesitation to seek therapy. And, there's a number of reasons for that. One, I think, is that there's a conflict, or there's a tension between psychology and faith. And it doesn't need to be, by the way. But, the idea that, I'm having this anxiety, but, I shouldn't be. I could just pray this away. Yeah. God can fix my problems. And, God can. And he often does. And sometimes he does in the way we want, and sometimes he doesn't, or when we want. And sometimes he doesn't fix our problems. Sometimes, in his infinite wisdom and compassion for us, he allows us to suffer, right? His ways are higher. We're never going to quite understand why sometimes. But, we as Christians, we can get caught in the trap of, I'm not praying hard enough, or, maybe I'm not doing something right. And then it becomes a vicious cycle of more anxiety. God's forsaking me. It must be punishment for my sins.
Right.
I think all of us as Christians might have thought that when something bad happened to us, but that's not biblical truth, and that's harmful.
Yeah. I definitely want to come back to that kind of faith element of things, and talk a little more about that. But, in terms of this general stigma, I think it seems like there's kind of a thing on the internet, or like a perception that you have like the kind of suburban white moms with a Starbucks that talk about their therapists, and they're going to that's kind of like the stigma, I guess, that is around having a therapist. So I mean, do you find that people are hesitant to reach out, or like you said, are people reaching out more than they might have been once upon a time because it's becoming more normalized?
Yeah, there's definitely more. I'm seeing, at least, I've been doing this for a decade, and I am seeing more. I think more of a acceptance of seeking therapy. When people call me or call our practice, they leave messages about what they're going through. And anyone can listen. Well, not anyone, but anyone in our practice, right? So people are.
They just want to talk to someone.
Yeah, I think that people are isolated, lonely, or they feel they could be surrounded by people and have meaningful connections, but they feel lonely in that they can't really share their deeper fears and desires. So, people are longing for that, longing to really have someone who can sit down with them objectively and help them work through these things. And also, have have an unconditional positive regard for them, which is really so important. We talked about the therapeutic alliance before.
Yeah. And I bet your work went through the roof with the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, because I found that being isolated was a huge trigger for me, that I'd never experienced anything that would resemble a mental health issue up until the point where, I had to work from home. I was stuck, and again, first year of marriage, just me and my wife put in a house together, and it's, we never had any issues particularly ourselves, but it was an interesting dynamic to be stuck with that one person for 24/7 and not be allowed to go into work. And I worked in music or wanted to work in music. I just graduated from university, and I really wanted to work in the music industry, and all of a sudden that's gone. So for me, the effects of isolation were, I guess I never really understood how much that would impact my mental health, and I'm sure you find a lot of people that had a similar experience with that.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's we say in our field that psychotherapy is pandemic and recession proof, right? People are always we see an influx, definitely during the pandemic. There was definitely an influx of people who were feeling isolated. Marriages, there was more tension in marriages because you're on top of each other, for work, and the kids are home too. And you can't bring them to school because schools are closed, and there was just stressors, just an incredible amount of stressors. And adolescents also, there was just a significant uptick in adolescent referrals too, because teenagers they need connection, and they're already on their phones all the time, but now they're always on their phones, and they're not able to go out and play and go to school. Isolation is a big issue for a lot of people, and like you said, it impacted you, and you were married, right? It's not like you're alone, right?
Right.
But you still,
To me, it was like there's probably no science behind this, but to me, I feel like it's healthy to have distractions so that the small things don't become big things. So to me, it was like, things like the minor inflections in tone of voice became annoying to us because we were with each other all the time. Or I would say a little thing that's would never normally be an issue if you were had been hanging out with friends all day and you were in a good mood, but because you're in the house and you've got nothing else to think about, you're overanalyzing those things, or you forget to do something and it's a big crisis because there's nothing else in your life that puts it in perspective. So to me, I feel like having healthy distractions or having hobbies and having friends it makes the small things, it puts them into perspective. And that was just, to me, I'm when I hear of people that don't have things in their life that they can kind of invest in, and that's kind of, maybe that's kind of why I started this show a little bit, because I found that not only was I bored, that's one thing, and wanted something to apply myself, and to get involved in, but I found that people were getting more irritable online and having worse discussions, because not only was it a pandemic time, it was an election time. People couldn't express their opinions face to face, so that online became kind of toxic, and just a lot of stress on that regard, where people were just getting very, a lot of conflict online, and there was all the riots and things that went on. It was just a very turbulent time, and I felt like maybe it would be a good thing to have a place where people could talk about issues in the world face to face, at least screen to screen, and just discuss them without having to become a keyboard warrior about them. So there's kind of, part of it was a hobby, and part of it was like trying to bring some peace into kind of a crazy time. But to me, like, just not having anything all of a sudden was difficult, and just not having a way to express creativity, especially like, because I played in the church band and stuff like that, and all of a sudden our church is meeting in Zoom, and I'm like, I have thoughts on that, and it was a lot in one go. But like you said, I'm sure it was good for business but bad for the general health of the world at that time.
I agree. Yeah.
It's yeah.
Oh yeah.
But do you think that there is a mental health crisis today in general, where like things, like you said, you said people are more open than they were, but a lot of people do commentate on like this general direction of society in terms of mental health, and that people are not as healthy as they once were. Is that something that you can perceive at all?
So that's another good question. I think that we are in a time, where we are very divided. And like you said, the keyboard warrior, mentality, where we have become so fractured as a society that's mental health or not, that's not healthy. No one is having discourse or dialogue anymore. Everyone is slinging names, disowning family members, and people perpetuate this idea of us versus them, right? Tribal mentality by, they're on Twitter or X or whatever it is, and Facebook all the time, just like you're not going to change anyone's opinion by arguing with them, but it keeps people angry. And I think that we also live in a society that's very productivity based, right? So we are very, people's jobs are, people working more hours, more demands, more roles. I'm not saying we should, work is good, right? But there's a lot of pressure. There's just a lot of pressure. And then with the demands of, with everything else going on in life, your kids, illness. I think more than ever, we live in a society where there is an increase. I do believe that there is an increase in anxiety, depression, and other significant more stress. I think it's 33% of Americans report an incredible amount of stress, and 75% of those, and we can look up the stats later, but 75% of those say it's affecting their physical and mental health, and that's a problem. It really is. Why are we so stressed?
Yeah, so lifestyle is playing a huge part in perhaps it is just the way the expectations of careers, like you said, or the presence of social media that wasn't there in the past. Perhaps a lot of things are just, we have to adapt to the increased sort of stimuli that there is in the world today, where we're kind of overloaded with information all the time.
Yeah, and again, the media, right? We have, we used to think of the news where grandpa and grandma would sit in front of a TV, and watch the nightly, right? Right. But now we're inundated with media. And what is media? Well, it's someone's opinion it's right that they're giving us real information, but it's always through a slant, right? It's either left or right leaning. And so what's happening is it's in a way it's propaganda, right? It's telling you, hey, this is what's going on and these people are bad, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So we are constantly bombarded with fear, left and right, up and down, every which way. And you just go on Facebook, you go on to check your accounts, and you're getting it, right? You're getting someone's idea about what's going on in the world and how it's going to affect you. And that to me is a problem. I tell a lot of my clients to say, you don't want to live in a cave, but at the same time, like, you do not need to watch CNN or Fox, to be fair, right? 12 hours a day. You just don't need to do it. It's not good for you.
Right, because like you said, it becomes an echo chamber of, you're just getting more and more intense and more committed to this one side of the, just this one perspective, and you're not allowing that gray area where you can kind of weigh up different opinions, and you have to support this person, Trump or Biden, at all costs, no matter what they do, and
Yep.
and in spite of any evidence against, like them being amazing people, you have to just stick by them. But anyway, that's perhaps a conversation for another day. But I'm curious your perspective. Now that we've talked a little bit about society, men in particular, I wonder, are men becoming more open to the idea of seeing a therapist and talking about their mental health? Because there's been a lot of high profile guys out there that have suffered and committed suicide and stuff like that. You think of people like Robin Williams or Anthony Bourdain, all these guys that seem to be all right, but they kind of behind the scenes were really struggling with a lot of issues, and that seems to be a crisis in its own right. But how do you see in terms of like day-to-day work, do you think men are becoming more open to this idea of speaking about mental health, or is it something there's a lot more we could be doing?
Yeah, I would say that. So I primarily see men. I do have some women on my client list, and some couples too. But I believe that men are becoming more open to talking about things. I think that the idea of needing to be a stoic, pulling your boots up by your own bootstraps has changed. And I don't know if that's a generational change. I think that we're going to see more acceptance as the generations continue. But I think that men like to hold things in, and women are very relational, so therapy for them is easier. It's let me go talk to someone about what I'm going through. Men are like to posture, right? So even if we do it in a way that's subconscious, and I think that men are definitely more hesitant than women to admit that they're going through something. But I really they're trying to think like of a ratio of male to female, referrals that we get, and it's probably split down the middle. Really, maybe a little bit more women, and mixing that up with couples, because that's both, right? But like I said, 75% of my client load is men, and that's also because men seek me out because I'm a male therapist. So there are women at our practice who have 75% women on their client load too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I assume there are probably more female therapists out there than men. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. That is right. Yeah. There's I don't know the numbers for that, but yeah, there's. But at our practice, we have a good mix. We probably 60-40, if 60 female, 40 male, which most practices are not like that. Most are 80-90% women. So yeah, just the idea, like the relational idea and wanting to help people. It's kind of a nurturing trait, right? Mm-hmm. So we do see that more in women, but there are plenty of men out there who are therapists and Christian therapists too.
Yeah, and what are some of the things that men struggle with in particular? It's probably a lot to do with that respect and position and how they see themselves in the world. I would imagine, but I'm sure. You see a lot of things, but are there any things that are particularly male issues? Is there such a thing as a male issue?
Probably not a male issue, but per se. But there are issues that I do see more in men. Pressure, putting pressure on yourself. Although that's not a diagnosis per se, but stress is a big one. But then I have young mothers who come in who are at home with 4 kids all day, and that's pressure too. That's stress also.
Yeah.
Anxiety and depression are big ones for men. But I think that goes for both men and women. I as a Christian therapist, I'm seeing a lot of men either come in for, or it comes out later that they're dealing with challenges with pornography. I think that I don't want to say it's an epidemic, but it's a problem. When there's what do they say? 68% of Christian men have admitted to viewing pornography in the last 30 days. And
oh my gosh.
It's a lot,
I wouldn't have
right?
thought it would have been that high.
Yeah, and there's a significant, even pastors, right? So, and it's not to throw anyone under the bus. I mean, it's like, let's bring this in the light and talk about it, because it's an issue. So if someone comes in and they say, I want help with pornography, I can't treat them for pornography addiction per se, because that's not recognized yet. So,
No.
Due to lobbying and all that. But what we do is we can work on compulsions, or we can work on anxiety, stemming from this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's probably something that Christian men recognize as an issue more than the non-Christians, probably. Because, I mean, I think everyone knows it's not right, but I would imagine that Christians are probably a little more self-conscious of that being like a stronghold in their life, I would imagine. Yeah,
they all pretty much, when they come in, either, hey, I haven't told my wife yet, or I know this is wrong, and this is just one of the things I want to work on. Yeah, I think that the Christian men who come in, like, I'm not telling them, hey, this is wrong. As a therapist, my job isn't to tell you what to do. It's to help you work through things, right? So people are pretty self-aware about that. Through the lens of our faith, right? It's right, it's lust, right? So there's that, but also the idea that it's destructive, in that, hey, I have an incredible amount of anxiety until I look at pornography, or I look at it and I can only go 2 or 3 days, and I have to look at it no matter how hard I try to stop. I just can't stop looking at it.
It's an addiction, just like alcohol or drugs.
Yeah. So it would be gambling, internet, compulsion, process addictions, things like that. It's not quite a substance, but it does have an impact on the brain in the same way. It's releasing a significant amount of dopamine, just like cocaine or methamphetamine would. But it's something that rewiring the brain takes time, but it can happen. So there's hope out there for people suffering with this.
And I think that's an important point, and it's. I'm glad you brought it up, because I have seen it, at least these days, it seems to be a real prevalent issue. I mean, again, especially among Christians, because they perhaps are more open to sharing about it. But would you recommend that if someone is dealing with that, like, that they battle on their own, or should they see someone about that? How would you, kind of counsel someone that's suffering with that addiction?
Yeah, definitely bring that out into the light. You want to talk to someone. And if you're in a relationship and that, let's say you're married and your spouse is not going to be okay with that, you don't necessarily need to tell them, be the first person to talk to about it. Sometimes I have guys come in and I say, look, why don't you, we're going to work through this, maybe get into an accountability group, talk to a pastor too, get some people on your team. And if you're not okay telling your spouse right now, because it could lead to, because some spouses, right, and rightly so, consider that infidelity, right? Infidelity of the heart, right? Yeah. So, let's work on this, get some time before you go and you tell your spouse. I don't believe you should keep secrets from your spouse at all, but I think sometimes it's a good idea to, hey, honey, look, I suffer with this, but it's been, 6 months and I'm actively treating it, right?
It shows that you're being a bit more proactive about it.
Yeah, and you're repentant about it, so, yeah.
And again, sort of last sort of comment on men and their mental health. Again, like I said, there seems to be an epidemic of men that are they bottle their emotions, and then it gets to the point where they're suicidal. And I'm just wondering, how often do you deal with people that, especially men, that are dealing with suicidal thoughts? Is that maybe something that's more common these days?
So, I do sometimes have clients who tell me they have intents to harm themselves. And what we do at our practice is we use an assessment, and it's a pretty thorough assessment. And we look at, is there a plan? Is there a means to do so? And we will get people involved. That's the only time that we can break confidentiality. One of the only times we can break confidentiality is if someone says they have plans to hurt themselves or someone else. Mm-hmm. We take that very seriously. It doesn't happen often. Most of my 95% of my clients don't ever report a desire to hurt themselves. But it does happen, a few times a year. And what we do is we don't let them just walk out the door. We're canceling our clients after them to make sure that they're getting the help that they need, that we're contacting their family, or if we need to get the police involved, right? It really depends.
Mm-hmm.
And clients will thank us later. Hey, thanks for, I know, you called the police on me, but thank you for doing that because I'm still here.
Yeah.
And it's, to answer your question, I think there has been a rise in suicide. I mean, we could look at this, the stats, right? And, kind of see where those stats are coming from too. But I do think that there is a rise in suicide.
And, just to kind of finish off, I think, I think it's important to kind of look at this, the fact that you are a Christian counselor and that there's is it a Christian practice that you work at, or, so it's, how does that differ? Like, you mentioned you sometimes can pray for people or that you can give them some spiritual guidance, but, how does that, do you find that there are different results almost, or it's more effective than if it was just a purely secular, practice? Because I would imagine there are a lot of things spiritually that go on in people that can't be treated by just reading out of a textbook.
Yeah, I definitely believe that being able to bring God into a session and examining faith, which is so important to people, we see results, we see healing. I see all kinds of chains being broken, forgiveness, just restoration in marriages, and I know that's God, right? I'm just a vessel, right? I'm allowing Him to speak through me, and I use the experience and the passion and the skills that I have, but ultimately everything we do as Christians is under the authority of God, right? So I believe that. I believe that. Now I can't say, well, hey, check out my research paper that shows that Christian therapy is more effective than secular therapy. But I will say that when someone who's Christian goes to a secular therapists can be effective, and many of them are. They're very competent, and some of them are great. Some of them aren't. Just like there are some Christian therapists who probably aren't the greatest, right? But it's just the idea that if your faith is so important to you, why would you go somewhere where you can't talk about that openly for fear of judgment, or someone saying, well, maybe it's your faith that's giving you guilt, and causing all your distress.
Right.
Secular therapists will say, well, Christian therapists may be biased. Well, wouldn't you be also, right? I mean, I've been in groups on social media where some secular therapists, and this isn't to knock secular therapists, like I said, I have friends who are, and they're wonderful, and they are very accepting of all values. If their clients are Christian, they don't have a problem with that. But there are some that brag about, well, I'm a social justice advocate, and I turn away conservative clients, and I turn away Christian clients. Like, hey, so what gives there, right? I went to the same school that a secular Christian went to, and I have the same degree and the same training and same license. I went through the same vetting process. But I'm just, I'm able to offer that extra dimension, that extra facet in therapy that you're not going to get if you go to a secular therapist as a Christian. So,
right. Yeah. And just to confirm what you said earlier, that Christians shouldn't feel a stigma to go and speak with someone. There's no conflict between struggling with mental health and not trusting God enough and not having enough faith, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. God doesn't promise us, like I said, doesn't promise us a life of ease. So, we're all going to suffer. I mean, it talks about suffering often in the Bible, and nowhere does it say once you find Jesus, your life gets easier. So if a Christian is going to go to a medical doctor for a physical ailment, right? Why wouldn't you go to a professional for a mental health challenge, right? So, I would hope that if you have cancer, you're going to go to an oncologist, right?
Right.
God can. I'm charismatic in my expression. I definitely believe that God can heal, and I've seen healing. But there's reasons why He may not do that, and it's always for our best. So, if you're going to go to a primary care physician when you have a sinus infection and get an antibiotic, why wouldn't you go to talk to someone else? And when's the last time you prayed with your doctor, right? You get to pray with us, at least, bringing God into this, like we're honoring God, we're bringing God into this. It's not like God versus, psychology. And pastoral counseling, that you can try that first. Pastors are anointed, right? God speaks through them. But, oftentimes, and there are some pastors who are clinical counselors too, but, oftentimes they don't have the training to do clinical counseling. They don't have the resources. They have 150 people that they are meeting with, and they can only see you every 3 weeks, and the issues are more longstanding. Our biggest referral source is actually local pastors. So
yeah. It's tough that I think a lot of people just get that regurgitated, God has not given us a spirit of fear or be anxious for nothing. It's just, a lot of that is just parroted back. But I just wanted to, put that on the record and hear it from you that people shouldn't be afraid to reach out for, like you said, just because if they need the help, they need the help. And it's just as, I guess in a lot of ways, it's just as physical as any other ailment, because it's a lot of times it's to do with how the brain's wired and, there's a lot more we could have gone into in terms of like medicating that and all those things. And I'm sure sometimes that's appropriate, sometimes not. But I just want to finish off by giving you the opportunity to share, maybe some ways that people can reach out, or if you have any advice for people that are struggling or need to talk to someone. I just want to give you the opportunity to talk a little about that. Yeah,
definitely. So, our practice is in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. That's where my licenses are. But we, I'm assuming your listeners are all over, right? They're
all over.
Yeah. So, seek out a therapist in your area, and okay, at the very least, talk to someone. Don't be afraid to admit that you are going through something. I think of 1 Corinthians 10:13, which is taken out of context, and people say, well, God never gives us more than we can't. Right? That's not true. It's talking about temptation, but I don't know anyone that can deal with the death of a loved one, right? Or that can, God promises to be with us in that, and He'll get us through that. And we do heal in some ways, but it's okay to admit that you need to talk to somebody. Talk to a pastor. Reach out to a friend. Reach out to be honest with a family member, or if you know someone who could benefit from talking to someone, don't be afraid to talk to them. People are lonely, and people are afraid to open up because they feel that they're going to be judged, they're going to be hurt, and it doesn't mean that they're bad people or they're necessarily wrong. But we just want to be there for people, and we just want to love them well. That's what we're called to do, right? To love our neighbor.
Yeah.
So we can start by just being someone that someone can have a meaningful communication with. Can sit down and talk with us. As far as therapy goes, it's effective. I mean, it's as effective as antidepressants and other medicines. There's research showing that, just because you have a therapist doesn't mean that you're weak, doesn't mean that you're failing in your faith. It just means that you just need someone to talk to. I can give my email if anyone wants to reach out to me and have further discussion. If that's all right, is that okay if I do that?
Yep, you can share it here, and I'll put it in the bio or the description in the video underneath as well. So you feel free to share that.
Sure, yeah. So it's Jesus and Counseling, all one word, @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, that's a great note to end on, and like you said, you're very busy and you've got lots going on. So I just want to say thank you again for agreeing to take some time out of that schedule to talk about this, because I hope this will help start some conversations that might help people find the help they need and help resolve some issues in people's lives. And if anyone has anything they want to to discuss in the comments section below, I'll be looking at the comments, and I can we can get some good discussion going, hopefully, and people, maybe you'll find that, we can point you in the direction of someone that can help you, or someone else can. But, let's not be afraid to talk about these issues. Let's, be open, and I hope that, this will start some good discussions, for anyone that's watching. But unfortunately, that's all for this week. I wish I could go on longer, but hope to see you again soon on the 2 things you shouldn't talk about. I worry for kids as well, because the kind of worldview is shifting to a point where I think a lot of things are attacking kids that they weren't facing in the past. Things like gender dysphoria, that kind of stuff is on the rise.
What we can do is we can talk about identity with them. There's such an emphasis that our identity is made up of our sexual orientation, right?